What's up, guys? Today we're going to be going over some wide receivers that you can find value in your draft. I've already done several mock drafts, and when you're going over the receiver position, it can be tough, right? It can be tough because a lot of times people take receivers early, but there's some really good gems this year that I'm going to help you find. So my job is to help you find some absolute steals in your fantasy drafts. And what I've done is I've gone over about 5. So I've got 5 different players that are absolute gems that you can get in fantasy football for a good discount. And so what I'm looking for when I look for receivers in this range are players that are significantly going to outplay their ADP. I think what happens is in fantasy drafts, a lot of times people go after the same type of players, right? Everybody hears the hype on, Puka Nacua or Marvin Harrison or, the players that are exciting. Brian Thomas from last year, Malik Neighbors. Those players typically go at around the ADP they should. What often happens is that there's players you can find value on based on a change in their situation. Maybe the quarterback has changed. Maybe as a receiver, they're starting to get up there in age, right? Maybe they're coming off of a major injury. Maybe another receiver has stepped into the fold and people don't know how to grade that player now. So what I'm going to do is give you 5 different players that I'm looking at that I think you can find some real value with as far as ADP. The first player I want to talk about is Garrett Wilson, who's going currently as the wide receiver 14. Now, Garrett Wilson, to me, is getting heavily disrespected when it comes to his rankings, and I think he's going to be one of the steals of the back end of the second round, high end of the third round in PPR drafts. Now, as the wide receiver 14, Garrett Wilson should be able to smash expectations. He was the wide receiver 10 last year in PPR leagues. And that was playing alongside Davante Adams with Aaron Rodgers. Now the team has stepped in and let Justin Fields become the starter. Justin Fields will now be the starter of this Jets team. We have a new regime taking over with Aaron Glenn, who's bringing over some of his philosophies from the Detroit Lions. So we talk about Justin Fields, who force feeds his number 1 targets. Let's not forget that what he did with the Bears, with DJ Moore, where he peppered him with targets, and DJ Moore was a top 10 wide receiver. We now get that here on the Jets, and Davante Adams is gone. I know Aaron Rodgers is gone, but now Davante Adams, who had a very strong second half of the year, is gone. And we're looking at potentially 175 to 200 targets for Garrett Wilson. I can see that happening. Can you name the number 2 receiver on the team? It's hard for me to. Now, Josh Reynolds is obviously on the team. They also drafted Arian Smith. Breece Hall could be the number 2 option in the passing game, and the team also took Mason Taylor in the second round. But this is very clearly aligning for Garrett Wilson to have a mega season paired up with his old college quarterback in Justin Fields. For me, I think, after last year coming off career highs across the board, we saw a career high in touchdowns where he had 7 touchdowns, over 1,100 yards. I think Garrett Wilson can have a much better season than he did last year and really reach that 1,500-yard, 10-touchdown potential. We're getting a steal with Garrett Wilson at the back end of this second round. And I think in fantasy drafts, if you land Garrett Wilson alongside another stud, you're going to be very happy with how things play out. Don't let Garrett Wilson fall in your draft. Be the person that takes him. Another receiver who is going way too low, Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman is going absolutely way too low in drafts. He was the wide receiver 41 last year, and I think a lot of people are attributing his decline in performance to like Josh Downs is taking over. Josh Downs was barely a top 35 receiver last year, and that was a strong season for him with just 700 yards. Michael Pittman was playing through a back injury all season long. And now we're taking him outside of the top 40 receivers. How is he going after Josh Downs when Josh Downs isn't the number 1 on the team? Josh Downs has to compete with Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell for touches. Michael Pittman is the guy. And I think things are going to open up a lot for him. The team drafted Tyler Warren in the first round this year. And whether it's Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones, Michael Pittman should be in a much better position. Are we not forgetting that Michael Pittman was a perennial top 20 receiver off the board in literally every draft we had? Like, he was going as a top 15 option in some years. And now because he had one bad year, we're cratering his draft value. It's not like Michael Pittman is 30 years old. He's 27. He's in his peak. So even if it's Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones at the quarterback, why are we assuming that Josh Downs is going to be the player to take over Michael Pittman? It doesn't make sense. Whether it's catches, touchdowns, or yardage, Michael Pittman's probably going to lead the Colts in all three of those categories. Why are we letting Michael Pittman go after the top 40 receivers? Let Michael Pittman slip to you. Go ahead. Like, let him be your wide receiver 4 or 5. You will have a starter in every fantasy format that there is. Michael Pittman is a player you need on your fantasy team. Next up, got to talk about Calvin Ridley. And Calvin Ridley is a player that a lot of people don't like. A lot of people don't like him for some reason. I don't understand it. I think there was a super high expectation 2 years ago when he went to the Titans that he was going to be a top 15, top 10 receiver. Like, I think people just saw him running really fast after he came out of that suspension and thought, Calvin Ridley is going to be elite. Well, it's a different situation in Tennessee. And since then, we've now said Calvin Ridley is ass. Now Calvin Ridley just doesn't belong on fantasy teams, going as the wide receiver 37 when he had 2 top 30 finishes in his first 2 years with Tennessee. He's the wide receiver 18 and the wide receiver 28. Yeah, we get rookie coming in, Cam Ward, but he was the #1 pick, and we saw what C.J. Stroud did in Houston with minimal expectations, what Bo Nix did with minimal expectations in Denver last year. They produced high-end receivers, Nico Collins and Cortland Sutton. Calvin Ridley is going to smash this ADP, and it's not going to be close. Now, you have to take him outside of top 35 receivers. He'll be your wide receiver 3 or 4 or 5, depending on how you draft. There's a chance that he enters the top 15 to 20 because he was the wide receiver 28 and 18 with Will Levis as the quarterback. Like, to me, I just see a very big opportunity with Calvin Ridley, and he's not the fun name to draft anymore. He's 32 years old, getting up there in age, but the team didn't really add anybody in this offseason. The Titans did not add an extra, like, perennial receiver. They added Tyler Lockett. The same staff is here. It's all the same Brian Callahan that trusted him last year, the same exact staff. Tight ends the same, run game's the same. The only thing that's changed is the quarterback. And I think Cam Ward's a better quarterback than Will Levis. If Cam Ward is better than Will Levis, Calvin Ridley is going to be a steal. Make sure Calvin Ridley isn't just chilling out there where you're like the 7th, 8th round and you need a receiver. Feel good about Calvin Ridley being your wide receiver 3, your flex, or even your wide receiver 4 on a bye week. To me, Calvin Ridley is going to be a massive steal in the later rounds, and I think that he's going to significantly outplay, probably end up as a top 25 receiver when it's all said and done. We got to talk about my boy Cooper Kupp. We got to have a conversation about Cooper Kupp. Now, listen, I know Cooper Kupp did a lot of y'all dirty last year. He did me dirty over the last few years, right? You took him in the first round. He got hurt. Is he up there with Puka Nacua? And now we see he slid all the way to Seattle. Yeah, he went to Seattle, so now we're not so confident that Cooper Kupp has value, right? JSN took a major step up last year, finished as a top 12 receiver, and it's easy to look at Cooper Kupp and think, man, he's washed, he's injury prone now, and I get the legitimacy behind the injury concerns. That's the one thing I can back. But there's no clear explanation why he should be wide receiver 40-something off the board. Like, wide receiver 46 is insane. He's going outside of anything outside of the top 30 receivers is kind of for a guy like Cooper Kupp is really disrespect. He'll be a top 25 receiver if he's healthy. Like, there's almost no doubt about it. And if your concern is Sam Darnold made Justin Jefferson the wide receiver 2, and he made Jordan Addison the wide receiver 21 last year. So he was capable of holding up 2 separate receivers in the top 25. Like, it doesn't make sense. Before Cooper Kupp had those injuries and kind of suffered late before week 14 last year, he was the wide receiver 5 in points per game. It's not like he's just terrible. It's not like he doesn't belong on the field. It's literally he just can't stay healthy. And I think on a points per game basis, this is the kind of player, if he can somehow play 14 to 16 games, we're talking about a player who's going to finish as the top 25 receiver. Last year in just 12 games, he was going as the wide receiver 38. And now he's going as the wide receiver 46 heading into the year? It doesn't make sense, y'all. It doesn't make sense. So for me, Cooper Kupp, I've been a big Cooper Kupp fan. I will continue to be a big Cooper Kupp fan. I'm taking him in almost every draft I can because he's going in an absurd range right now. I think it's time we find value now with Chris Olave. And I've been on the Chris Olave kind of like fade train over the years. Like if y'all been rocking with my content, I really haven't been a big Chris Olave guy. He doesn't provide a whole lot of touchdown upside. I don't see him really as a 100-catch guy. But Chris Olave has typically been a top 20 commodity at the receiver position when he's healthy. And now he's clearly going outside of the top 35 receivers. As wide receiver 37, I think there's a lot of value with Chris Olave, especially if you decide to draft a tight end early or draft a quarterback early or maybe go heavy running back. Like you can get a nice solid wide receiver 3 with upside on a weekly basis. The major concern here is obviously Derek Carr is gone. So what does the Saints offense look like? I think it's the biggest question mark and why a lot of people are going to steer away from Chris Olave. We also have Rashid Shaheed, who got injured in the middle of last year, but kind of looked the part in this offense. But it's easy to forget that Clint Kubiak, the offensive coordinator for the Saints, is now in Seattle. And so when I think about Chris Olave, and maybe he doesn't carry the upside of a top 12-ish type receiver, which a lot of people expected him to have based on his yards per route run over the last few years, I think he does have some value, some standalone value here at wide receiver 37 ADP. I feel like there's a chance he could hit 1,000 yards this season. I don't think that would shock anybody. The question is, do you believe in Tyler Shough? And I think that you have to be able to say, listen, he might be better than what Derek Carr was, better than what Spencer Rattler was. There's a slight possibility that we could be getting an upgrade at quarterback, and a lot of people aren't accounting for that, especially if the team decides they want to go get Jameis Winston. We know Jameis Winston has a big arm, can get it downfield. I think Chris Olave has really good value and opportunity if that happens. But for now, I think even down here as the wide receiver 1 for this Saints team, Chris Olave should not be this far down draft boards. I think we get draft fatigue sometimes of taking the same guys and they disappoint us. And the one thing he has to prove is that he's healthy. You know, having the concussions he's had over his career, he has a smaller frame. It's tough to rely on that on a weekly basis. But for me, if I can get Chris Olave as my wide receiver 4, that would be a great upside piece to have during bye weeks or if there's any potential injuries throughout the year, even if he's the one that's injured, right? Like, I think Chris Olave, there's a negative sentiment about this New Orleans offense in general. We see it with Alvin Kamara's ADP. None of the other Saints are really even worth drafting right now. They're not even ADP-wise, they're not even existent, right? It's really just Olave and Alvin Kamara. I think Olave has a lot of value down here. And if you can get him outside of the top 36 receivers, it's really a zero risk. Even if he somehow does, you know, he's not the same player after the concussions or maybe something affects him throughout the year, you're still getting a player, a good football player at a discount. So for me, Chris Olave, who, like I said, the offense has changed and maybe he hasn't been the most reliable. I've always kind of had him as like a top 25-ish receiver instead of a top 15 or 12-ish receiver where he was going before. This looks like a good value spot for a player that a lot of people used to love. He's not older. He's going into his prime. He's coming off an injured year. This is a discount. This is a discount. This ADP is a discount. Go ahead and get Chris Olave this year. I think you won't regret it. Even if he's your wide receiver 3, I think there's some upside. So that does it for the 5 receivers that I value a lot more than others do. And right now, that are absolute steals in fantasy draft space on ADP. These numbers can change throughout the summer, but make sure you stay tapped in, subscribe to the page, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace out.